The blizzard hit Chicago 3 hours earlier than the meteorologists predicted, which meant most people were caught unprepared when the snow started falling like a white curtain drawn across the city at 4:37 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. By 6 p.m., visibility was down to 15 feet. By 7 p.m., the expressways were parking lots of abandoned cars. By 8 p.m., the city had issued a state of emergency telling everyone to shelter in place, stay off the roads, and wait for the storm to pass. But not everyone had somewhere safe to shelter, and not everyone had the luxury of waiting. Darius Coleman was 38 years old, and he'd lived through 17 Chicago winters, so he knew better than to trust weather predictions that said the storm wouldn't hit until after midnight. He'd left his job at the warehouse at 3:30 p.m., picked up his 7-year-old son Elijah from after school care by 4 p.m., and had them both home and safe in their small 2-bedroom apartment by 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the first flakes started falling. Now, at 8:17 p.m., with the wind howling like something alive and angry outside their 6th-floor window, Darius felt the satisfaction of a man who'd made the right call at the right time. His boy was safe. They had food. They had heat. They had each other. That was all that mattered. "Daddy, will the storm blow our building down?" Elijah asked from his nest of blankets on the couch, his dark eyes wide with the delicious fear of a child who knows his father will protect him from anything, even blizzards. Darius smiled from the kitchen where he was making hot chocolate, the real kind with actual cocoa and milk, not the instant packets, because snow days called for small luxuries even when your budget said you couldn't afford them. "This building has stood through worse storms than this one, little man. We're safe here." "What about people who don't have buildings?" Elijah asked, his face scrunching with the kind of concern that made Darius's chest ache with love and worry in equal measure. His son had inherited his mother's compassionate heart, the only good thing she'd left behind when she'd walked out on them 3 years ago. "We pray they find shelter," Darius said, bringing the hot chocolate to the couch and settling beside his son. "And we're grateful for what we have, even when it's not much." They had heat. Tonight, though the landlord was inconsistent about paying the heating bills, and sometimes their apartment became cold enough to see their breath. They had food, though Darius's warehouse job barely covered rent and utilities, and there were weeks when he chose between groceries and Elijah's medicine. They had each other, which was the only thing that had kept Darius going through the years after Shanice left, through the judgment from family who said he should have fought harder to keep his marriage together, through the exhaustion of single parenthood and poverty that ground you down, like sandpaper until you forgot what it felt like to be smooth. At 8:43 p.m., Darius's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer because creditors had his number, and he'd learned that ignoring calls after 8 p.m. was sometimes the only way to keep your sanity intact. But something made him swipe to accept, some instinct he couldn't name. "Hello? Is this Darius Coleman?" A woman's voice, strained and desperate and somehow familiar, though Darius couldn't place it. "This is Darius. Who's this?" "It's Rachel Martinez, from Jefferson Elementary, Elijah's teacher." Darius sat up. Straighter, alarm bells ringing. Why was his son's teacher calling him at 8:43 p.m. during a blizzard? "Ms. Martinez, is everything okay?" "No." Her voice cracked. "Nothing's okay. Darius, I need help. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know who else to call." The story came out in fragments, broken by static and what sounded like wind so loud it was almost screaming. Rachel had stayed late at school grading papers, hadn't paid attention to the weather reports. By the time she'd realized how bad the storm was, she was already on the road, driving to her mother's house on the south side. Her car had died somewhere near 47th and King Drive. She'd tried to walk to find shelter, but the wind was too strong, the cold too brutal. She'd found an abandoned gas station, broken a window to get inside. She had her 6-year-old daughter Emma with her. They'd been in the gas station for 2 hours now. No heat, no light, temperature dropping. Emma was getting lethargic, the first sign of hypothermia. "Why are you calling me?" Darius asked, already standing up, already looking for his winter coat even though he knew this was insane. knew that going out in this storm was suicide. Why not 911? I tried. Rachel's voice was barely audible now. Lines are overwhelmed. They said they'd send someone when they could. But that could be hours, and Emma doesn't have hours, Darius. She's so cold, and she stopped shivering, and the websites say that's bad. That means her body is shutting down. I called you because... She took a shaky breath. Because at parent-teacher conferences, when we talked about Elijah's progress, you said if I ever needed anything, to call. Because you're the only parent who's ever offered help instead of asking for extensions or making excuses. Because I'm desperate and terrified, and you're the only person I could think of who might actually come. Darius looked at Elijah, warm and safe under his blankets, hot chocolate cooling on the side table. He looked out the window at the wall of white that was the blizzard. He thought about Rachel Martinez, who'd been the only teacher who'd really seen his son, who'd noticed when Elijah came to school hungry and had started keeping granola bars in her desk for anyone who needed a snack, who'd called Darius in November to tell him Elijah was gifted, not struggling like the previous teacher had claimed, and all he needed was someone to believe in him, who'd spent her own money on books for Elijah when the school library said they didn't have budget, who'd seen a black single father barely keeping it together and had treated him with dignity instead of judgment. Where exactly are you? Darius asked, and Rachel's sob of relief was answer enough. She gave him the intersection. Darius calculated 15 miles in good weather. In this storm, impossible. Definitely impossible. Probably fatal. I'm coming, he said. Stay inside. Keep Emma as warm as you can. I'll be there as soon as I can. He hung up before she could thank him, before he could change his mind, before the rational part of his brain that said this was insane could overpower the part that remembered Rachel's kindness to his son. Daddy? Elijah's voice was small. Where are you going? Darius knelt down to eye, level with his boy, his heart breaking and bursting simultaneously. I have to go help someone, E. Someone who helped us and now needs help back. In the storm. Elijah's eyes went wide. But you said stay inside. I did, and you will. Mrs. Washington downstairs. She'll come sit with you. Is it Miss Martinez? Elijah asked, too smart for his 7 years. I heard you say her name. Darius nodded. Her and her daughter Emma, they're stuck in the storm. I have to go get them. Will you die? The question was asked with such simple directness that Darius felt tears prick his eyes. I'm going. To do everything I can to come back to you. That's not the same as promising. No, it wasn't. Darius pulled his son into a hug that felt like it might be the last one, like he was trying to memorize the weight of this small body, the smell of hot chocolate and kid shampoo, the sound of Elijah's heartbeat against his chest. You're right, but sometimes we have to help people even when it's dangerous. You understand? Elijah nodded against his shoulder. Because Ms. Martinez helped us, so we help her back. Exactly. That's exactly right. Mrs. Washington, their 73-year-old neighbor who'd become like a grandmother to Elijah, arrived within 5 minutes of Darius's call. She took one look at him in his winter gear, at Elijah's worried face, and didn't ask questions, just pulled the boy into her arms and nodded at Darius. You be careful out there, baby. Chicago don't forgive mistakes in weather like this. Darius nodded, kissed Elijah's forehead one more time, and stepped into the hallway. The building's elevator wasn't working, power flickering in and out, so he took the stairs 6 flights down. With each floor, his determination solidified. This was crazy. This was probably going to get him killed. But Rachel Martinez had seen his son when other teachers hadn't, had fed him when he was hungry, had believed in him when others had written him off as another one of those kids from a broken home. Darius couldn't leave her and her daughter to freeze in an abandoned gas station while he sat warm and safe. He wouldn't be able to look Elijah in the eye again if he did. The lobby door fought him, wind pressing against it with the force of something alive. When Darius finally forced it open, the cold hit him like a physical blow. 15 below zero. The weather app had said, before wind chill. With wind chill, it felt like 40 below. cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Darius pulled his scarf up over his mouth and nose, pulled his hood tight, and stepped into the storm. Within 10 steps, he could barely see the building behind him. The world had become nothing but white and wind and the kind of cold that made your lungs hurt with each breath. His car was in the lot behind the building, assuming it wasn't buried under 3 feet of snow by now. Darius made his way there more by memory than vision, his hands out in front of him. Like a blind man, his feet sliding on ice hidden under fresh powder. His 2003 Honda Civic looked like a snow sculpture, completely buried except for the antenna poking up like a flag. Darius spent 15 minutes digging it out with his hands because he hadn't thought to bring a shovel. His fingers going numb despite his gloves. When he finally got the driver's door open and climbed inside, the car was a freezer, frost coating the inside of the windows like lace. He turned the key, praying to gods he didn't usually believe in. The engine coughed, died. Darius tried again. The engine turned. Over, caught, roared to life. He let it warm up while he cleared the remaining snow from the windows, his entire body already shaking from cold, and he hadn't even started the drive yet. At 9:28 p.m., Darius pulled out of the parking lot onto streets that looked like lunar landscapes, familiar roads, transformed into alien territory by the storm. The city plows hadn't been out yet. Snow was coming down so fast that even if they had, the streets would be buried again within minutes. Darius's Civic crawled forward at maybe 10 miles per hour, his headlights illuminating nothing but swirling white. Chaos. He could barely see the road, couldn't see traffic lights, couldn't see other cars until he was almost on top of them. 15 miles. In good weather, 15 minutes. Tonight, if he was lucky and didn't get stuck or lost or killed, maybe 2 hours, maybe more. Emma didn't have 2 hours. Darius pressed down slightly on the gas, felt the car fishtail, backed off. Too fast meant losing control. Too slow meant running out of time. He found a rhythm, slow and steady, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes straining to see anything in the whiteout conditions. At 9:47 p.m. he came upon a car spun sideways across the road, abandoned, hood buried in a snowdrift. Darius maneuvered around it, his Civic's tires spinning before finding traction. At 10:03 p.m. he passed a bus stopped in the middle of the street, windows dark, passengers presumably long gone. The storm was winning. Chicago was losing. And somewhere in this frozen nightmare, a little girl was dying. Darius's phone buzzed. Text from Rachel. Emma stopped responding. Please hurry, please. His foot pressed harder on the gas. The car fishtailed. Darius corrected, heart hammering. He couldn't die getting there. Emma needed him to arrive alive. At 10:34 p.m., Darius thought he saw 47th Street, but the sign was buried and he couldn't be sure. He'd driven these streets hundreds of times, but in the storm, everything looked the same. White, endless, hostile. He turned anyway, guessing, praying he was going the right direction. And at 10:52 p.m., after driving 5 miles in 90 minutes, after nearly sliding into 2 abandoned cars and 1 fire hydrant, after deciding 3 separate times that this was suicide and he should turn back, Darius saw it. The abandoned gas station. Dark windows, roof heavy with snow, and in one window, a small light, a phone flashlight, Rachel's signal. Darius pulled up as close as he could get, threw the car in park, and ran. The gas station door was locked from inside. He pounded on it. Rachel, it's Darius. Open up. Movement inside. The door cracked open. Rachel's face appeared, pale and tear-streaked, and so relieved she looked like she might collapse. You came. Oh God, you actually came. Darius pushed inside and immediately saw Emma. She was maybe 6 years old, wrapped in what looked like every piece of clothing Rachel had been wearing, plus some old rags found in the gas station. But she wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were closed. How long has she been like this? Darius asked, already moving, already picking up the small body that felt too light, too cold, too still. 20 minutes. I can't wake her up. I tried CPR, but Don't know if I'm doing it right, and she's so cold, Darius, she's so cold. Rachel was barely coherent, her own lips blue, her body shaking violently from cold and fear. Can you walk? Darius asked. Rachel nodded. Get in my car. Now. Leave everything else. They stumbled through the storm to the Civic, Darius carrying Emma, Rachel clinging to his jacket. He put Emma in the back seat, Rachel climbed in beside her, and Darius got behind the wheel. The car was still running, still warm. He cranked the heat to maximum. We need a hospital, Rachel said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. She needs a hospital now. Darius looked at his phone. GPS was useless in the storm. He knew there was a hospital somewhere near here. But where? Which direction? He'd lived in Chicago his whole life, but the storm had erased his sense of direction. I don't know where, he started. Turn left out of here, Rachel interrupted, her teacher voice cutting through panic with forced calm. Go 3 blocks, turn right. St. Anthony's Hospital is maybe a mile down. I used to work near there before I started teaching. Darius didn't question. He followed her directions. The Civic, struggling through snow that was now over a foot deep in places. In the back seat, Rachel was doing something, rubbing Emma's hands, talking to her daughter in a voice that mixed panic and forced cheerfulness. Come on, baby. Wake up for Mama. We're going to the hospital. They're going to fix you. Right up, but I need you to wake up first, okay? Can you open your eyes for me? They drove through streets that were completely empty, the entire city shut down, the storm absolute in its dominion. At 11:07 p.m., Darius saw it. St. Anthony's Hospital, emergency entrance, lights on, people moving. Inside. Salvation. He pulled up to the emergency entrance doors, nearly hitting them, and laid on the horn. Help! We need help! He was out of the car, pulling Emma from the back seat, running through the doors into warmth and light and the smell of disinfectant that meant hope. Medical staff swarmed them immediately, taking Emma from his arms, asking rapid-fire questions Rachel tried to answer, while Darius stood there shaking, his body finally registering how cold he was, how close they'd all come to dying. A nurse wrapped a blanket around him. Sir, you need to sit down. You're hypothermic. I'm fine. But his legs gave out anyway, and suddenly he was in a chair, and someone was taking his vitals, and someone else was asking him questions he couldn't quite process. How long was he outside? Where had he come from? Did he lose consciousness at any point? Darius's eyes stayed on the trauma bay where they'd taken Emma, where doctors and nurses worked with the kind of organized urgency that either meant things were very bad or very good. He couldn't tell which. Rachel stood beside them, refusing to leave her daughter, still shaking violently, mascara streaked down. Her face looking 10 years older than she had at parent-teacher conferences. Time became elastic. Minutes felt like hours. Darius sat in the emergency room wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot coffee a nurse had brought him, feeling sensation slowly return to his fingers and toes in waves of painful pins and needles. His phone rang. Mrs. Washington. Elijah wants to know if you're okay. The sound of his son's voice in the background, anxious and young. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him Ms. Martinez and Emma are at the hospital and they're going to be okay. He prayed that was true. At 11:43 p.m., a doctor emerged from the trauma bay, young, Indian, exhausted. He walked straight to Rachel. Ms. Martinez, your daughter is going to be fine. We've got her core temperature rising. She's responding to treatment. She's going to make a full recovery. She got very lucky. Another hour and we'd be having a different conversation. Rachel's legs gave out. She dropped to the floor sobbing, not from grief but relief so profound it had nowhere to go, but down. The doctor knelt beside her. She's asking for you. Would you like to see her? Rachel nodded, couldn't speak. Let the doctor help her up and guide her toward the trauma bay. But before she went through those doors, she turned back to Darius. You saved her life. You know that, right? You saved my daughter's life. Darius didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Rachel disappeared into the trauma bay, and Darius sat alone in the emergency room, reality slowly catching up with him. He'd driven through a blizzard that had shut down the entire city. He'd risked his life, risked leaving his son without a father, because a teacher had asked for help. He'd done something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and he still wasn't sure which. At midnight, when the storm outside showed no signs of stopping and the emergency room had filled with other hypothermia cases, frostbite victims, and car accident casualties, a nurse told Darius he needed to stay the night. "You can't drive in this. The roads are completely impassable now. We're setting up cots in the conference room for people who got stuck here. You should rest." Darius called Mrs. Washington, told her he wouldn't be home until morning. "Elijah is asleep on my couch," she said. "He's fine. You take care of yourself." Darius wanted to protest, wanted to demand to go home to his son, but exhaustion and cold had caught up with him, and he could barely keep his eyes open. A nurse led him to a conference room that had been converted into temporary housing, maybe 30 cots lined up in rows, blankets and pillows distributed to stranded hospital staff and Good Samaritans who'd brought in other victims. Darius collapsed onto a cot and was asleep within seconds, his body shutting down with the finality of someone who'd pushed past every limit and had nothing left. He dreamed of white landscapes and a little girl with blue lips, of his son, asking, "Will you die?" and not getting the answer he deserved. He woke 3 hours later to find Rachel sitting on the cot next to his, wrapped in a hospital blanket, her hair still wet from a shower someone had let her use. "Hey," she said softly. "Didn't want to wake you, but I wanted to say thank you. Properly, not just in a traumatized panic." Darius sat up slowly, every muscle in his body screaming protest. "How's Emma?" "Sleeping. She's warm and her vitals are good, and the doctors say she can probably go home tomorrow once the storm clears. They said if we'd been out there another hour, she wouldn't have made it." Rachel's voice cracked. "You drove through a blizzard that shut down the entire city because I called you. Why?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Darius was too tired to fully process. "You helped my son," he said finally. "When Elijah was struggling, when other teachers had written him off, you saw him. You believed in him. You fed him when he was hungry and bought him books and made him feel like he mattered. I couldn't leave you out there. So this was payback? Returning a favor?" Rachel's tone wasn't accusatory, just curious, like she genuinely wanted to understand the calculus of the decision he'd made. "No." Darius shook his head. "It wasn't transactional like that. It was just, you showed me kindness when I needed it. When you called tonight, scared and desperate, I had a choice. Be the kind of person who shows up when people need help, or be the kind who finds reasons not to. My son was watching. I needed him to see his father be someone worth looking up to." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you know what Emma said when she woke up?" First thing out of her mouth after, "Where's Mommy?" Darius shook his head. "She said, 'Did the man come?' Mom said someone good would come help us because good people still exist." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I told her that in the gas station, when she was scared and cold and asking if we were going to die. I told her there was a man, a good man, who would come help us if I called him. And I believed it, Darius. Even though it was insane to think anyone would drive through this storm, I believed you'd come. What kind of person does that make you?" "Tired," Darius said with a small smile, "and apparently terrible at self-preservation." Rachel laughed, a sound that held relief and exhaustion, and something else Darius couldn't quite identify. "I'm serious. Most people, if I'd called them, would have said no, would have told me to wait for emergency services, would have been rational. You threw rationality out the window and drove into a blizzard for someone you barely know." "I know you well enough," Darius said. "I know you're a good teacher and a good person, and you've been kind to me and my son when you didn't have to be. That's enough." They sat in the conference room, surrounded by other stranded people, some sleeping, some talking in low voices, all of them connected by the shared experience of being trapped by the storm. Somewhere in the building, Emma was sleeping peacefully, her body temperature normal, her life saved. Somewhere across the city, Elijah was safe at Mrs. Washington's. And here, in this temporary shelter made from a conference room and hospital cots, Darius and Rachel sat together processing the fact that they'd survived something that could easily have killed them both. Morning came slowly, dawn struggling through storm clouds that still dumped snow on Chicago, though with less ferocity than the night before. By 7 a.m., the blizzard had been downgraded from apocalyptic to merely severe, and the city began the slow process of digging itself out. Darius woke to the sound of hospital announcements, people shuffling around the conference room, gathering their things, preparing to attempt the journey home. His phone showed 17 missed calls, Mrs. Washington checking in, his warehouse supervisor wondering when he'd be back, and 3 calls from a number he didn't recognize but felt vaguely familiar. He called Mrs. Washington first. "Elijah? Right here eating my oatmeal, and watching cartoons. He's been worried about you all night, but I told him his daddy is tough as nails. You okay, baby?" "Yeah. Storm's dying down. I'll be home as soon as I can." Darius hung up and found Rachel at Emma's bedside in the pediatric ward. The little girl looked tiny in the hospital bed, but her color was back. Her eyes were open, and she was eating Jell-O with the focused intensity of a child who'd been too cold and scared to eat for hours. "Mr. Coleman," Emma said when she saw him, her face lighting up with recognition, even though they'd never formally met. "You're Elijah's—" "Dad, Mom told me you saved us." Darius felt his throat tighten. "Your mom did most of the saving, keeping you warm until I got there. Mom said you drove through the storm even though you could have died. She said you came because we needed help, and good people help when they're needed." Emma spoke with the absolute certainty of childhood, stating facts as she understood them. "That's what heroes do." "I'm not a hero," Darius said, uncomfortable with the weight of that word. "Just a dad who knew another parent needed help." But Emma was already shaking her head, her curls bouncing. "Heroes always say that. In the movies they always say they're not heroes, but they are. You're a hero, Mr. Coleman." Rachel caught Darius's eye over her daughter's head, and her expression held something complex. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of recognition, like she was seeing him differently now than she had before. "The doctor says we can leave around noon once they finish her discharge paperwork," Rachel said. "But our car is still dead at that gas station, and I don't know how we're going to get home. My mom's place is 8 miles from here, and with the roads like they are—" She trailed off, the problem obvious and unsolvable. "I'll drive you," Darius said immediately, then paused. "I mean, if you want. My car made it here, it should make it to your mom's." Rachel's eyes widened. "Darius, you've already done so much. You can't just chauffeur us around all day." "Sure I can." "Road conditions are better than last night, and I'm not leaving you stranded after driving through a blizzard to find you. That would be anticlimactic." His attempt at humor worked. Rachel smiled, really smiled, the first genuine expression of anything other than terror or exhaustion he'd seen from her. "Okay, thank you. Again. I'm going to owe you for the rest of my life at this rate." "You don't owe me anything," Darius said, but he was already planning the route in his head, calculating how long it would take to get Rachel and Emma to her mother's, then get himself home to Elijah. At 11:47 a.m., after discharge paperwork had been completed and Emma had been bundled in hospital blankets because her own coat had been too wet to wear, the 3 of them made their way to the parking lot. Darius's Civic was buried again, but not as deeply as before. He brushed it off, got the engine running, and they set out into a Chicago transformed. The storm had stopped completely now, leaving behind a landscape of white so bright it hurt to look at. Cars were still abandoned all over the roads, but city plows had been out, creating narrow corridors of passage. The drive that had taken Darius 2 hours in the storm took 45 minutes in daylight, and by 12:35 p.m. they arrived at Rachel's mother's house, a small bungalow on the south side with a snow-covered yard and smoke rising from the chimney. An older woman burst out of the front door before they'd even parked, not bothering with a coat. Running through snow in her slippers. Rachel's mother, clearly. She yanked open the back door and pulled Emma out of the car, crying and laughing simultaneously, checking her granddaughter for injuries, while Emma protested that she was fine. "Grandma, stop squishing me." Rachel got out more slowly, and her mother immediately transferred her attention, pulling her daughter into a hug that looked like it might crack ribs. "I've been calling you all night. Why didn't you answer? I thought you were dead. My phone died, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Rachel was crying now too, all the fear and exhaustion of the past 12 hours finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. Darius started to back up, to give them privacy, but Rachel's mother spotted him. "Who are you?" Her tone wasn't hostile, just confused, trying to place this strange black man who'd apparently delivered. Her daughter and granddaughter. "That's Mr. Coleman, Grandma," Emma shouted. "He's a hero. He drove through the blizzard to save us." Rachel's mother's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, gratitude. "You're the one who Rachel called? The one who came to get them?" Darius nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Darius Coleman. My son is in Ms. Martinez's class." Rachel's mother walked through the snow in her slippers, ignoring the cold, and took Darius's hands in hers. "You saved my baby and my grandbaby. You drove through that storm when no one else would come. How do I thank you for that? How does anyone thank someone for saving their family?" "You don't need to thank me," Darius said, feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of her gratitude. "I'm just glad I could help." But Rachel's mother was already shaking her head. "No, you don't. Get to be humble about this. You did something extraordinary, and you're going to let me tell you that. And you're going to accept my thanks, young man, because I won't be able to sleep at night if I don't tell you properly." She pulled him into a hug that rivaled the one she'd given her daughter, and Darius found himself blinking back unexpected tears. When was the last time someone had hugged him like this? Like he mattered? Like he was family? "Come inside," Rachel's mother commanded, releasing him but keeping one hand on his arm like she was afraid he'd disappear. "You need hot food and coffee, and I won't hear any arguments." Darius started to protest that he needed to get home to Elijah, but his stomach growled audibly and he realized he hadn't eaten anything substantial since the gas station coffee and vending machine granola bar at 6 a.m. "Just for a few minutes," he agreed. Inside, Rachel's mother's house was warm and cluttered in the way that homes lived in for decades always are, with photos covering every surface and the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Rachel's mother, "Call me Lorraine, everyone does," immediately went into hostess mode, making coffee, heating up leftovers, fussing over Emma while simultaneously interrogating Darius about his life with the directness of someone who'd raised children and didn't see the point in tiptoeing around personal questions. Where was Elijah's mother? Gone, 3 years now. Was Darius seeing anyone? "No, ma'am, too busy with work and parenting." Did he need help with anything? Always, but he managed. Lorraine nodded along, her eyes sharp and assessing, clearly calculating something Darius couldn't quite figure out. They ate lunch together, leftover chicken and rice that tasted better than anything Darius had cooked in months, while Emma regaled her grandmother with increasingly embellished versions of their rescue that had Darius driving through tornadoes of snow and fighting off polar bears. "There weren't any polar bears, mija," Rachel corrected gently, but she was smiling, and the tension, and the eye that had been carved into her face since the gas station was finally easing. At 2:17 p.m., Darius's phone rang. That unknown number again. This time he answered. "Mr. Coleman, this is Patricia Morrison, principal of Jefferson Elementary. I've been trying to reach you since early this morning." Darius felt his stomach drop. Had something happened to Elijah? "Is my son okay?" "Elijah is fine. He's still at your apartment with Mrs. Washington, I believe. I'm calling about something else entirely. Mr. Coleman, Rachel Martinez is one of my best teachers. When she didn't arrive at school this morning and wasn't answering her phone, I started making calls. Eventually, I got through to her mother, who told me about what happened last night, about how you drove through the blizzard to rescue her and her daughter. Darius didn't know what to say to that. I just did what anyone would do. That's where you're wrong, Principal Morrison said, her voice firm. Most people wouldn't have done that. Most people would have called 911 and hoped for the best. You risked your life for someone you barely knew, and I wanted to tell you that Jefferson Elementary recognizes extraordinary character when we see it. I'd like to invite you to speak at our next school assembly about courage and community. I think our students need to hear from people like you. I'm not really a public speaker, Darius protested weakly. You don't have to be. Just tell them what you did and why. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. After more protests and eventual agreement to at least think about the assembly, Darius hung up to find Rachel and Lorraine both staring at him. What was that about? Rachel asked. Darius explained, feeling embarrassed, like the whole thing was being blown way out of proportion. He'd just helped a friend. He hadn't cured cancer or stopped a war. Darius, Rachel said carefully, do you understand how rare what you did was? Do you know how many people I called before I called you? 7. My ex-husband, my brother, 3. Friends from college, 2 co-workers. Every single one of them said they couldn't help, that it was too dangerous, that I should just wait for emergency services. You were the 8th call, and you were the only one who said yes. Darius absorbed this information slowly. 7 people had said no. Before Rachel had called him. 7 people had chosen their own safety over helping a woman and child freezing to death. And he'd been the only one who'd said yes, not because he was braver or better, but because he'd remembered what it felt like to need help and have everyone look the other way. I'm not special, he said finally. I couldn't say no, not to you, not after what you've done for Elijah. That's what makes you special, Lorraine said gently. The fact that you don't see it. You just do what needs to be done because it's right, and you don't expect praise or recognition. That's character, young man. Real character. At 3:04 p.m., Darius finally said he needed to leave, needed to get home to his son. Rachel walked him to his car, moving slowly, still recovering from the hypothermia and exhaustion. I meant what I said earlier, she told him as they stood in her mother's driveway. I'm going to owe you for the rest of my life. You saved Emma, you saved me. I don't know how to repay that. You already did, Darius said, by being a good teacher to my son, by seeing him when other people didn't, by treating both of us with dignity. We're even. Rachel. But Rachel was shaking her head. We're not even close to even, but I'm going to try to get there, starting with making sure Elijah has everything he needs to succeed, starting with being there for you the way you were there for me. Darius drove home through streets still clogged with snow, but passable now, his mind processing the past 18 hours in fragments that didn't quite feel real. Had he really driven through a blizzard? Had he really saved a woman and child from freezing to death? It felt like something that had happened to someone else, some character in a story, not ordinary Darius Coleman, who struggled to pay rent and worked 60 hours a week and sometimes fell asleep on the couch before his son because he was too exhausted to make it to bed. At 3:47 p.m., he finally pulled into his apartment building's parking lot, finally climbed the stairs to the 6th floor, finally opened his door to find Mrs. Washington and Elijah playing cards at the kitchen table. Daddy! Elijah launched himself across the room with the kind of desperate relief only children can express so purely. Darius caught him, held him, breathed in the smell of his son's hair and felt something in his chest unclench. This was why he'd come back. This was why he'd been careful on those icy roads, why he'd fought to stay awake when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. Because this boy needed him. Did you save Ms. Martinez? Elijah asked against his shoulder. And Emma? Yeah. Buddy, I saved them. Was it scary? Terrifying. Were you brave? Darius thought about that question. I was scared the whole time, but I did it anyway. That's what bravery is, I think. Being afraid but doing the right thing regardless. Mrs. Washington gathered her things, told Darius to call. if he needed anything, and left them alone in their small apartment that had never looked so beautiful. Darius and Elijah spent the afternoon on the couch, Elijah asking 1,000 questions about the blizzard and the rescue, Darius answering as honestly as he could while editing out the parts that would give his son nightmares. They ordered pizza because Darius was too tired to cook, and they watched movies until Elijah fell asleep against his side, small and warm and alive. Darius carried his son to bed, tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and stood in the doorway watching him sleep, feeling the weight of what might have been. He could have died last night, could have crashed his car or gotten stuck or frozen to death trying to reach that gas station. Elijah could have lost his father the same way he'd lost his mother, to absence, to choices, to the world's cruel randomness. But he hadn't died. He'd made it there and back, and now a little girl was alive because of choices he'd made in minutes that would affect years. At 9:23 p.m., lying in his own bed for the first time in 36 hours, Darius finally let himself process everything. The terror of driving through the blizzard, the relief of finding Rachel and Emma alive, the exhaustion that had hit him like a truck in the hospital, the way Lorraine had hugged him like family, the way Emma had called him a hero with such certainty, the way Rachel had looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. Sleep came. Hard, his mind replaying moments in loops, Emma's blue lips, the wall of white snow, Elijah asking, "Will you die?" But eventually exhaustion won, and Darius drifted off into dreams of storms that ended and mornings that came. The next day, Thursday, was a snow day. The schools were closed. Businesses were struggling to open. The city was still paralyzed by cleanup efforts. Darius called in to work, was told not to bother coming in until roads were clearer, and spent the day with Elijah building a snowman in their building's courtyard and having snowball fights with other kids who'd emerged from their apartments like prairie dogs after hibernation. It felt normal, beautifully normal after the nightmare of Tuesday night. But at 11:34 a.m., his doorbell rang. Darius answered it to find a delivery man holding a massive gift basket wrapped in cellophane, filled with gourmet foods and expensive-looking items. "Darius Coleman?" the man asked. Darius nodded, confused. "This is for you. Sign here." Darius signed, carried the basket inside, and found a card attached. "To the bravest man I know. You didn't just save our lives, you showed us that good people still exist. Thank you, Will. Never be enough, but it's all we have. With eternal gratitude, Rachel, Emma, and Lorraine." Darius stared at the basket, at the imported cheeses and fancy crackers and chocolate that probably cost more than his grocery budget for a month, and felt overwhelmed. This was too much. He'd just helped someone. He didn't need gifts. But then Elijah appeared beside him, eyes wide at the basket. "Dad, did someone send us presents?" "Ms. Martinez and her family, to say thank you." Elijah pulled out a package of fancy cookies. "Can we eat these?" "Yeah, buddy, we can eat them." They spent the afternoon sampling the basket's contents, Elijah declaring each item fancy with appropriate 7-year-old reverence, and Darius felt something shift in his chest. Maybe it was okay to accept gratitude. Maybe he didn't have to minimize what he'd done. Maybe it was okay to be seen as someone who'd done something good. Friday arrived, and with it, the slow return to normalcy. Roads were cleared, schools reopened, work resumed. Darius dropped Elijah at school at 8:15 a.m., and when he walked his son to the classroom, Rachel was there. She looked up as they entered, and her face transformed with a smile so bright it was almost painful. "Elijah, Mr. Coleman?" She moved toward them, then seemed to remember she was surrounded by other students and parents, and stopped herself. "Elijah, we're so glad you're here. Class, can everyone say good morning to Elijah?" The chorus of "Good morning, Elijah" was loud and enthusiastic, and Elijah beamed, proud to be singled out. After the other parents had left and the kids were settling at their desks, Rachel pulled Darius aside. "Did you get the basket?" "I did. It was too much, Rachel." It wasn't nearly enough. But Darius, I wanted to ask you something. Are you free this weekend? Darius's schedule was always the same. Work Saturday, errands, and Elijah time Sunday. But he found himself saying, maybe. Why? Because I want to do something, to really thank you, and I want Emma to get to know Elijah better since she won't stop talking. About the hero's son. What if we had a play date? The kids could play, we could talk. Maybe I could cook you dinner that isn't gas station sandwiches. Rachel was nervous, Darius realized. Actually nervous, fidgeting with her hands, avoiding eye contact. Was she asking him on a date? Or just offering friendship? He couldn't tell. That sounds nice, he said carefully. Elijah would love that. Saturday? My place. I'll text you the address. Saturday works. Saturday arrived cold but clear, the storm now just a memory buried under frozen snowbanks that would last until spring. Darius spent the morning cleaning the apartment and making sure Elijah understood the ground rules. Be polite, use your manners. Don't break anything, don't ask for things. Don't, Dad, I know how to behave. Elijah interrupted with the exasperation of a child who'd been reminded one too many times. Ms. Martinez is nice. I'm not going to be weird. Darius realized he was the one who was being weird. Nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous about social situations in years. This was just dinner. Just a play date for the kids. Just a thank you from a grateful parent. Nothing more. Except it felt like something more. And Darius couldn't quite figure out what. They arrived at Rachel's apartment at 5:02 p.m. It was in a better neighborhood than Darius's. Newer building. Better maintained. Rachel answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair down, looking more relaxed than Darius had ever seen. Her. Come in. Emma's been bouncing off the walls all day waiting for you guys. Emma appeared immediately, launching into enthusiastic chatter about the video game she'd set up for them to play. Elijah, usually shy around new kids, seemed drawn in by her energy, and within minutes they were settled. In front of the TV, controllers in hand, competing loudly. Rachel led Darius to the kitchen where something delicious was cooking. I hope you're hungry. I might have made too much food, but I wanted to make sure I cooked things you'd actually like. I'm not picky, Darius assured her. And whatever it is, it smells amazing. They fell into easy conversation while Rachel finished preparing dinner, the kind of comfortable chat that shouldn't have been possible between two people who barely knew each other but somehow was. They talked about Elijah's progress in school, excellent, about Emma's recovery, complete, no lasting effects from the hypothermia, about the storm, already being called the worst in Chicago in 20 years, about their lives in general. Darius learned that Rachel had been teaching for 8 years, that she'd divorced Emma's father 3 years ago when he'd decided being a parent was too much responsibility, that she'd moved to Chicago from Texas to be closer to her mother after the divorce. Rachel learned that Darius had grown up on the South Side, that his own father had died when he was young, that he'd planned to go to college for engineering, before Elijah's mother had gotten pregnant and plans had changed. Do you regret it? Rachel asked. The way your life turned out. Darius thought about that. I regret that Elijah's mom left. I regret that I can't give him everything he deserves. But I don't regret him. He's the best thing that ever happened to me, even if he came earlier than planned. Dinner was chicken enchiladas, rice, beans, and the kind of homemade meal that Darius hadn't eaten in months. The four of them sat at Rachel's dining table, Emma and Elijah talking over each other about video games and school and their favorite foods, while Darius and Rachel exchanged glances that held shared parental amusement. This felt domestic, Darius realized. It felt like family dinners he'd never had growing up, like the kind of normal he'd always imagined other people had but never thought he'd experience himself. After dinner, while the kids watched a movie, Rachel and Darius cleaned up together, working in synchronized rhythm like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Can I ask you something? Rachel said, drying dishes while Darius washed. Something personal? Sure. When I called you Tuesday night when I asked for help, did you hesitate? Even for a second? Darius thought back to that moment standing in his apartment with Elijah on the couch and the storm raging outside. Yeah. I hesitated. I thought about saying no, about telling you to wait for emergency services, about protecting myself and staying safe with my son. But then I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be, what kind of father I wanted Elijah to see, and I knew I had to come. That's what I thought, Rachel said softly. Because you're a good man, Darius Coleman. The kind who does the right thing even when it's hard, even when it's terrifying. I'm really not that special, Darius protested. But Rachel turned to face him, her expression serious. Yes, you are. And I think you need to hear that. Because I don't think anyone tells you. You're special because you show up, because you help, because you see people who need help and you don't look away. That's rare, Darius. Rarer than you think. They stood in Rachel's kitchen, inches apart, the air between them charged with something Darius couldn't quite name. Attraction, maybe. Recognition. The beginning of something that hadn't existed before Tuesday night, but was undeniably there now. I should probably go soon, Darius said, not moving. Elijah has church in the morning. Or, Rachel said carefully, you could stay a little longer. Have coffee, talk. Emma would love for Elijah to stay for the whole movie. Darius stayed. They had coffee. They talked about everything and nothing. About their kids and their jobs and their dreams that had been put on hold, but never completely abandoned. At 9:15 p.m., when the movie ended and both kids were yawning, Darius finally said he needed to leave. Rachel walked them to the door, and Emma hugged Elijah. Goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of children who'd decided they were friends. Can Elijah come back?